Start Cynthia Guzman with Estelano Advisors.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good to see you all virtually. And really happy to be here to provide you all an update on the NCS workforce study. Give me a second while I learn to share my screen. This is the first time I do this on WebEx. Sorry, everybody.
And I also have a copy of your slides, so if it ends up being easier, I can always try sharing, and you can tell me to advance slides, whatever ends up being easier for you.
Why don't we do that? Okay. I'm having trouble doing that. Sorry, Jason. Hopefully that's not another. I could also, if Charlotte, my colleague Charlotte's also online, and maybe she could do it if that makes things a little easier.
No, that's I have them pulled up as long as you haven't changed the slides. So yeah. Let's go ahead and try sharing.
Apologies for that, folks.
No problem. I'm trying to figure out how to do this in presentation mode. Well, let's try full screen. Okay, how's that? Did anything change for anyone?
No.
I think you got to share your screen first, Jason.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had clicked on share. So let's go. Are you?
There you go.
Screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks everyone for your patience. Just pretend this title slide says September 26th, and we're addressing the Natural and Working Lands Committee. So good morning, everyone. It's been a few weeks since we've met with you all. We're really happy to be here with you this morning to give you an update on our work to date on the Natural Climate Solutions Workforce Study. Next slide. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. I would like to start us off with a little bit of a scope refresh to resituate ourselves into the purpose of the study and lay out some of the questions that we seek to respond to as we go along on this project. Second, we're wearing multiple hats today. Jason's playing Liz's role. I will assume the role of Echo Northwest for just a second to give you all an update, not just on the industry definitions, but also a little bit on occupation, since I know you all did a little exercise providing some of the occupation names that we consider to be part of NCS. So I'll give you all an update on that as well. Let's see. Then I will share some early findings, emphasis on early, because we're in the midst of our data collection and still very much in the middle of talking to people. I know we've talked to a few of you on the advisory committee just this week, and we're still processing and organizing all of that information, but happy to share some themes that we've heard so far, non-exhaustive, but just to give you all a flavor of what we're hearing about the industry. And of course, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so going back to a little bit of a scope refresh, I'd like to start us off with the primary research question that we're seeking to answer through this effort, which are, what are the workforce development and training needs needed to support the adoption of natural climate solutions on natural and working lands? In other words, what are the specific training, skills, education, and supports that are needed to prepare our labor force to meet the future job demands of these 5 working land types? While some of the skills and supports workers might need might be similar across land types, we do anticipate there's going to be some nuances with regards to the specific training required. It's also important to note that this is the first of its kind cross-sector study in the state of Oregon. Hasn't been done before. Liz reminded me of that a couple of days ago. So it's big. It's a big question. And we could easily spend a whole project focused entirely on one land type. But we do see this as an initial scan aimed not just at identifying the needs, but also taking a step back to even define the composition and scale of this industry, which, like I said, hasn't been done before. So wanted to lay that out as we go into some of our findings. Next slide. So how are we going about answering our research question for this scope? First, we have to define what occupations fall under natural climate solutions. As you all know from previous presentations from Andrew and the Echo Northwest team, this isn't a strictly defined sector. So we've had to do a fair amount of review with the support of this committee to define what comprises occupations in the NCS universe, from farmers, foresters, conservation scientists, and everything else. Next, what are some exemplary programs doing good training in the NCS field? Our team is compiling a non-exhaustive list of training programs and doing these 1 to 2 page profiles on each. We'll be unable to feature every program in Oregon, but we do want to include programs that offer something unique, be it in the type of training or population served, et cetera, et cetera. And we've already heard of some great programs from the many interviews that we've done and desk research. Third, we want to determine how large is the workforce. Based on our definitions of Oregon's natural and working land sectors and occupations, we want to develop an assessment that determines the size of the workforce in terms of employment earnings, numbers, and various other types of demographic information. So that's work that's happening right now, led by Echo Northwest. Lastly, what actions should we take to ensure that the natural climate solutions workforce is equipped to meet the state's climate goals? So this study will also serve as a roadmap by how government, nonprofits, industry, et cetera, can work together to build and restore nature across all of the natural and working land sectors, because we believe that a trained workforce will result in better projects that will meet our climate goals. Okay, and a little bit on project status. I mentioned we're still in the midst of interviewing employers, agencies, tribe and tribal organizations. We anticipate having that wrap in early October. But tribal engagement may extend through the end of the project, just because we want to make sure that we give folks the time and have space to incorporate their expertise into the project. I also talked about the workforce development and training program profiles. That is in progress. Similarly, Echo Northwest is doing occupational profiles, so 1 to 2 page profiles that you all may have seen before that feature particular occupations. You may have seen one specific to the forestry sector. So we're going to be creating those profiles at the same time. Lastly, this is all going to come together into this workforce assessment and needs analysis, which we anticipate submitting a draft of in late October. So next time we see you all again, we're going to have some working findings and recommendations. So stay tuned for that. Okay, next slide. And here's some insights that we think we'll get from both the anecdotal information that we're learning through conversations with you all and other folks in the field, as well as some of the data that Echo Northwest is compiling. Do we need more workers? Where are they needed? And what do we need to do to recruit them? Is there a lack of a particular training where additional programs or certifications are needed? Also with the emphasis of, if there's a great program that exists and is doing great work, no need to reinvent the wheel. We really want to elevate what's working and identify what might be missing, but in no means duplicate efforts that are already existing on the ground. And we've learned about all the great efforts that are happening across all different land types across the state. So that is certainly something we can keep in mind. Also, how can we work together as multi-sector partners to advance the workforce on natural and working lands? And beyond the availability of jobs or training, what more can we do to support to ensure that the jobs that are being created in the NCS sector are quality jobs where folks can grow and sustain themselves and their families? Next slide. You all may have seen this from my last presentation. Our definition of what we mean by quality jobs is defined, really informed by the work of Jobs for the Future. Though our study here won't make recommendations across every element listed here, we think we'll have insights on things like compensation from our workforce assessment and advancement through our interviews with employers and training providers. Okay, let's skip this one. I think we talked a little. Okay, great. Okay. When thinking about natural climate solutions, we think it's most helpful to think about it in the context of a project. Now, you all saw a version of this graphic. We've gotten some really helpful feedback from some of the folks on on this committee, so we decided to do a version 2 and give it another shot. So but we think this graphic really helps represent our thinking and how we're approaching this sector. So let's try this again. Let's say we're talking about a coastal restoration project. What are the types of occupations involved? So you could see that we've set up this, the project phases in a little bit more of a circle rather than a one direction, an arrow that sort of goes in one direction. Here we're thinking about the occupations that would lead or support on the planning of a climate solution. This could range from land acquisition to design, permitting, etc. Concurrently or thereafter, we can assume there's occupations dedicated to the implementation of a solution. That's through the initial construction of the solution, conservation efforts, etc., etc. Lastly, once the solution is in place, we should anticipate some occupations dedicated to the maintenance of the project, be it through ongoing stewardship to ensure that the project meets the objectives for which it was designed. Some occupations may only do work in one of these project phases. Others likely touch 2 or all of these. So we understand that there's a lot of fluidity here, but wanted to lay that out just for as an example. Next slide. Great. Within this scheme, we see some opportunities for upskilling. And by that, I mean for workers to gain some additional skills through formal training or an industry credential, for example, or on-the-job training even. For example, a forestry worker might make their way up to a crew lead or a project manager or some other technical position. We've also heard a lot about the importance of cross-training. We've heard anecdotally through our interviews about the importance of project managers and outside-facing staff possessing a broad understanding of NCS work in order to guide a team or a project more effectively. The term that I've heard used a few times is just enough to be dangerous. And that's on things like permitting, planning, maybe legal, regulatory aspects. Sometimes it helps just to, you don't need to know every detail, but to be able to speak the language. So that's really important. And we think that creates a more flexible, adaptable, and skilled workforce. Next slide. Great. So ideally, a workforce ecosystem that allows folks to enter the workforce, provides opportunities for advancement and cross-training across different disciplines, can facilitate this concept that I know you all are plenty familiar with, which is adaptive management, which could result in better managed lands and better net carbon sequestration, which is ultimately the goal. Okay, so now I will share a little bit about Eco Northwest's work on the industry definitions and occupations. Next slide. Okay, so I understand that I think Jason distributed the preliminary industry list earlier this week. This list is comprised of codes set by the Federal Classification System. This is NAICS, North American Industry Classification System. So just as a refresher, these codes are used to classify businesses by their type of economic activity. So these codes will allow us to get a count of the number of businesses in the state of Oregon that do NCS related work. So there's no set list of industries that comprise natural climate solutions. So the ECHO team has put a list together based on existing industries, agriculture, forestry, transportation, professional and scientific services, et cetera. So those are some of the codes that you see in the list. So here's some caveats to keep in mind when reviewing it. These are federal designated categories, intentionally broad, and of course, may not align with what you all call these industries in the field. And some of these categories, because the NCS industry isn't strictly defined, some of these categories might contain a large share of firms that do NCS work, say in the forestry sector, but it might comprise a smaller share in others, say transportation or warehousing. We could imagine that some of these businesses do NCS related work, but others, likely a large share of them, do transportation and warehousing activities for the transportation of other goods. So the list in front of you is the result of some pretty deep conversation with Odo and some of the insights that we heard from you all in the last meeting and in between meetings. While some industries like manufacturing were omitted, some of the occupations within the manufacturing sector may be included in the occupational analysis. So that's a really important point I want folks to understand. there might be a particular activity that you're not seeing there. We're accounting for some of that, particularly for industries that might have a small share of NCS related occupations. We're accounting for that in the occupational analysis, where we're looking at the number of jobs versus here, where we're looking at the number of business establishments that are doing this work. So we've had to do a lot of sort of consultations with folks and worked really closely with Liz and Jason in order to make sure that these lists reflect as closely to what our understanding of the NCS sector is. We anticipate, we will have a final report that details some of the methodology around what was included or omitted. So yeah, this is very wonky stuff. Of course, Echo Northwest they're really the experts on this stuff, but wanted to sort of lay that all out as additional context for you all as you all are reviewing that list. Next slide. Okay, so for just a little bit more on that list. So the industry lists that you see there are defined at various levels of specificity. So a NAICS code, like I said, they're codes that classify businesses by their primary economic activity. They have a hierarchical structure. So basically, the longer the code, the more specific the industry is. However, each code gives us different levels of data. So in order to paint the most comprehensive picture of the industry, we've had to assemble a collection of codes at the 3, 4, and 6-digit levels. So that is what you all are seeing. 6-digit NAICS codes provide the most specificity, but are generally only available through confidential data, which is Echo had to submit a request to Odo in order to gather some of that information. It's typically not openly available to firms such as ours. And with other sources, the 4-digit codes, for example, gives us less detailed information like workforce characteristics, wages, demographics. Those 6-digit NAICS codes would give us things like employment totals, average pay per employee, and location of establishments. So this is how we're weaving the tapestry of the NCS sector, by pulling together these categories in order to paint the picture for you all. Yeah, so wanted to share that. Yeah, thanks. We could go to the occupational update. Just really quickly on this one, we've received a fair amount of input on the occupation list. Thank you. The survey or the Google Doc that Liz sent out, where you all listed the various occupations that you all see in projects that you work in, are extremely helpful. We've also been asking folks that we are interviewing for a little bit of input into, okay, well, what do you all call the folks that you work with? So we've been assembling all of that information, and we think that that's going to eventually result in a little bit of a crosswalk. And by that, I mean a list of the occupations as they're formally described in federal, state data sources, and then how you all describe them in the field. So we'll have a little bit of that analysis either in the report or in the appendix. We think that's going to be really important in order for folks to really see themselves in the report, and also just acknowledging that we're working with imperfect federal data that doesn't quite, may not fully get at the nuances of this industry, and that's okay. So Echo is reviewing all of that information now and finalizing the occupational list, and the methods and rationale for the final list will be included in the body of the report as well as the appendix. And you'll hear more about that at the end of next month when we next see you all again. Okay, then we can go to early findings. Awesome. Okay, so here are some very broad themes that we are hearing. I don't think a lot of this is going to surprise many of you, but would love to hear reactions or thoughts about some of these things during our Q&A portion once I finish these slides. So one of the things that we found is just big finding for us anyway about the diverse NCS employment landscape. We know that public agencies plan and implement many NCS related activities, but a contracted workforce performs most of the on the ground NCS work. We've had really rich conversations with public agency folks that usually culminate in, you should really talk to one of our contractors. So part of our current tranche of interviews has been getting in touch with some of the contractors that some of you all have recommended. And we've gotten some really rich insights about the folks that are directly hiring and directly hiring folks and just some of the things they're seeing on the ground. Let's see. We're seeing a lot of our own disparities. We've heard quite a bit about agencies like conservation districts in rural parts of the state having difficulty with recruiting staff or retaining staff just because of the inability to compete with pay or benefits from better funded districts in other parts of the state. So as a result, what we've heard anecdotally is that some of the workers, particularly planners, ecologists, project manager types, use the lower wage rural positions as a stepping stone to more well-resourced ecological jobs, maybe with the state or elsewhere. This type of career pathway isn't a bad thing per se, but state resources can provide greater opportunities for advancement that allow workers to stay in place, build jobs for local communities, and help rural districts really develop and retain local talent. More barriers. We've heard quite a bit about rural trainees having challenges with transportation. A basic requirement in this sector across the board is the ability to drive. So many rural programs are starting with driver's ed in order to get some of these folks ready to show up to work and be ready to do the job that needs to be done. Other barriers, compensation doesn't keep up with the cost of living. So high cost areas like the coasts have trouble finding and retaining workers in state positions that can't pay enough to hire within the community. Some programs are innovating on workforce housing solutions, especially for seasonal work. I was talking to a contractor just yesterday who provides who owns a couple of rental units that he uses for some of his temporary workers to live in, and that's something that he provides himself, or rather the company provides themselves, and that's certainly a challenge. And childcare, of course, must be considered when building supportive services for training programs. Next slide. In speaking to particularly folks working for public agencies, we've heard concerns again and again that so much of this work is federally funded. And even before the current administration, there was more work to be done than there was adequate funding. So the uncertain funding landscape really makes it hard to project job growth in the NCS field. We asked this question of, where do you see the sector going? Where do you anticipate needing more workers, and what kinds of positions? And we've gotten a little bit of hesitation to answer that question, just because and we very much understand this, the funding landscape is so uncertain, but the need is so great at the same time. We've heard quite a bit about seasonal work, so much work being governed by seasons, planning in spring and fall, doing stream work outside of the fish migration schedule, fire season, etc. The fact that our work is so contingent on the seasons makes it difficult to make temporary jobs into permanent year-round quality jobs. And if we're thinking about creating a workforce that can stay in the sector over the long term, we need to really think about how to piece together some of those projects in order to make it a full-time job. And folks aren't compelled to have to leave the sector in order to make a living. We've also heard a lot about the importance of project managers. I referenced this a little bit earlier in my presentation. Project managers really need to have broad functional knowledge across multiple domains rather than just a deep expertise in areas. So it helps them understand a project context, guide a team, make informed decisions. So again, this is clearly an area where there's some need for cross-training, and also thinking about how those folks can, just thinking about a formal way to kind of cross-train some of these folks. It seems like a lot of that work happens on the job. Is there a need to formalize that? That's some of the things that we're going to be asking about, and would love to hear your thoughts or reactions to that or any of these findings. Okay, next slide. This is my last one. Now I would love to open it up to all of you all. Does the framing or purpose of the study resonate with you? Is this what you signed up for? Is this what you understood us to be doing? Would love to hear about that. On the industry list and occupations, I would love for that to be, happy to answer questions to the best of my ability, but really Echo Northwest are the experts here. So if you want to provide any written feedback to Jason, I think that would be maybe the best way to go about it. And any reactions or questions regarding our early findings, would love to hear from you all. I've already had some really deep, fascinating conversations with some of you individually. So would love to benefit from y'all's expertise. And I would love to stop talking now and hear from you all. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and would love to open it up to the group.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Yeah, as Cynthia said, we're happy to get your feedback here. Since I forgot to put this in the chat at the beginning of the meeting, anything we don't get to in this meeting, questions, suggestions that we aren't able to talk about here due to time limitations, please feel free to drop them in that Google Doc or email me and or Liz about them, and we will be happy to answer them. Just first highlighting some comments in the chat here from Jonathan Saul. So I believe over in the industry side, or the industry conception is when this comment came through, that we were missing procurement, contracting, and roles outside the implementing organizations like native plant seed production that are used in restoration. I will say that as Cynthia talked about, some of the these occupations may be better captured within the occupation list. Cynthia, you're free to add additional information about that as you want, but we can also make sure to raise this concern with Echo Northwest, who's more on the industry and job side of this. And then Jonathan also mentioned, regarding support for training, that they might be funded through local but term limited bonds and levies. Yeah, we're working to try to get at this like funding source and funding considerations when it comes to the job training work. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay, so I'll go ahead and open it up to the floor here. Andrea, it looks like you've got your hand up if you'd like to comment, question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the occupations list is going to be much more relevant for us to look at because the industry classification codes, I've always found although necessary, are not very useful. For example, the whole range of stuff that say watershed councils or soil and water conservation districts are doing are under that one, high level other environmental wildlife conservation organizations, right? So what's more relevant is going to be looking, and I can see that, because you need to find out what organizations are classified under that so you can get the scope. But really what the down and dirty comes into, what are the jobs? What are the jobs that we need to be training people for? Right? Like where, one that popped up is soil scientist. Well, I wasn't really sure where that would fit in these things. It might have been other science. It might have been, right? But we have to make sure we don't lose things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We are well aware of the soil scientist aspect of this. And yeah, it's really difficult figuring out where they're located in all this. I will say, as Cynthia was talking about, the industry codes do help us get some geographic information that may be critical for this consideration. Cynthia, I don't know if you had additional comments on this.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, and that's sort of the rationale for some of the multi-digit code selection, is so we can get at some of that specificity.
Yeah. Yeah, Dean, please.
Yeah, so first, thanks, Cynthia, for the overview. Doing this once a month, it really helps me to catch up and see the big picture again, so I appreciate that. So my comment has to do with training, and it seems to me there's sort of two kinds of training. One is, I think, maybe the kind of training that Andrea just alluded to, which would be getting people into occupations and starting off. But then there's another kind of training where people who are already in an occupation and providing a service need some training to learn about the NCS aspects of their job. And so one example of that is crop advisors. Most farmers that I know are dealing with somebody who works for a private company, gives them advice on controlling pests and fertilizing their crops and so forth, and they also sell those products. But that's where a lot of farmers rely on for the specific information for what they do on their farm, and most importantly, I think for NCS stuff is nitrogen fertilizer, which if overapplied can lead to denitrification and the production of nitrous oxides and so forth. So I see a need to help those kinds of folks, for example, to learn more about the climate impacts of some of the work that they do, and building that into their skill set, which is a little bit tricky because some of those folks, I would say like 20, 25 years ago, they were probably climate change deniers. Now, in my opinion, not so much, but still maybe resistant to the whole idea of NCS type work. So anyways, that's my comment, is there's sort of like two kinds of training that might be needed here.
That's a great point. Thank you, Dean.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight on how this works, and also think about how we may be capturing that or could potentially improve our methods for capturing it. We'll definitely raise this with Echo Northwest as well. Somebody's audio is having some issues here, but okay. Thank you, Dean. I have that recorded. Ellen.
I completely agree with Dean, and I think there's two types of consultants that people go to, or the farmers. One is folks that have been doing this a very long time and had their college training a long time ago, and then there's the newer ones. And the newer ones I find are much more aware of the soil health practices and all that. I think what we need to do is figure out how to reach the longtime guys that could use a refresher in what current thinking is. I know that what I'm learning now is different from what I learned when I was in college 40 years ago. So just something to think about is that you've got the old timers and the new timers. And it's not just with like the crop advisors, it's with a lot of these different workers that are in these different jobs.
Thank you. Yeah, that's another useful insight here I've recorded. Yeah, okay. Are there any other questions? It's difficult to tell with this platform.
I have one.
Yeah.
Just in looking at, this may not be the right context for this question. I was driving and then switching to my computer, so apologies. But just in looking at the initial listing of the NAICS codes and the occupations you have in there, quite a bit of what I thought should be included wasn't included. And I heard a little bit about how some of that might be included in a different method of classification. Can you talk about that again?
Yes. So there's some industries here that are clearly, most if not all of the jobs are in the NCS sector, like forestry. Mm-hmm. Then there's some other industries like transportation or warehousing, where there's likely some firms that do NCS related work, but don't make up a large share of the industry. So for examples like that, I see. Some of the occupations within the industry are going to be included in the occupational analysis, but not in the industry analysis, which is what you have in front of you today. So what you have in front of you today is the list of industries, and that's how we're going to get numbers on the numbers of business entities within the state of Oregon that do NCS related work. Because some of these categories don't perfectly reflect the NCS related sector, we will have to look at other industries that are not included in this list but have occupations that do NCS related work that should be on the occupational assessment. So two different things. You don't have the occupational list in front of you, or at least not the newest one. You just have the industry one.
Yeah.
So that's it's incredibly confusing. I realize, and Andrew would do a lot better job explaining it than me. But that's sort of part of what we're working with.
Thank you. I will say that we've worked with the occupation list to include some of the forestry support type occupations, like tool sharpeners, things like that I believe you've raised previously. But if you have other occupations specifically that you're concerned about not being represented.
Okay, so thanks for that. So I see things in the ag list that could conceivably be included in forestry also. And then I see that you have the broad category of support activities for forestry. I don't know what that includes. You call out logging specifically, that's awesome. But I mean, hydrologists, for example, land managers.
We've worked on hydrologists, certainly. Land
Okay.
managers now. Okay, I'll make sure that these are reflected.
You're going to need geologists.
Yep, geologists are there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
So maybe when we see that other list, it'll all become clear.
Yeah.
Yep.
And when you have site prep and contractors, I don't know, because you have that under construction. So maybe you're right that doesn't include forestry.
No.
There is site prep related to forestry harvest, but that's kind of a different thing.
Okay, let me. Yeah, the industry codes are really difficult to manage. The occupations themselves can be a little broad sometimes. Some of them are like very specific, but yeah, we've worked hard. We've read through industry definitions and gone through the NAIC or the NAICS codes ourselves.
Yeah.
These are, we're not perfect, so any
Sure.
those are recommendations. I'm always happy to.
And I know Department of Forestry was going to send you some more thoughts. I don't know if they've done that yet, but yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so Jonathan Saul asks, would certification services like FSC or a new climate-based certification be covered under other advocacy? That's something we may just have to, I can't speak off the top of my head currently about whether those would be included, but I'll make a note of it. And it looks like you're putting in the doc as well, but we'll run that by our contractor.
And it looks like you've got social advocacy and environment conservation and wildlife advocacy. I'm not seeing anything on the industry side for advocacy, if we're going to get into advocacy, which I think we absolutely shouldn't.
Okay. Made a note. Also, if you have specific, like a very precise ask with that, please feel free to use the Google Doc so that I can make sure I'm reflecting your comments accurately to both Liz as well as the contractors.
I mean, is this something, sorry, but is this something that we're actually including in Natural Climate Solutions advocacy?
So I think, so again, Echo Northwest would have the best answer to this, but I'm assuming that industry might cover I think they might cover some of the social enterprise programs that do training around NCS. So that might be why that particular industry is included. But we would need to confirm with Andrew and the team.
Yeah.
I think including advocacy organizations in general is highly inappropriate.
Yeah, and it might just be, again, these categories are really imprecise. So I think that's definitely something that we can share.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, any further questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, Cynthia, and thank you everyone for your participation in that discussion. I think we will go ahead and use this time. Let's make sure that our GHDMI is on here. Olga, are you in attendance?
I am.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you very much, Cynthia. And we will move on to the inventory presentation. And we will, yeah, so oh, let me stop sharing my screen. Sorry, I forgot that I was still doing that. Okay. Olga, are you able to share your presentation?
I sure hope so. Let me try.
Okay. This discussion or this presentation will have a different structure with its discussion because we're talking about three different aspects of the inventory, or three different categories. Today, we're going to have three discussion sections so we can make sure to give everyone time to talk about each of them as once we've presented the methods and data on those sections. So I'll try to set timers and let folks know how much time we have to ask questions and comments, but then I'm going to have to move us on to the next section of their presentation so that we can make sure we cover everything before the hour's over.
Jason, so it's asking me to kind of change some settings on my side and quit and rejoin. So I'm going to do that in a second, and we'll be back in, give me 15 seconds, yeah?
Okay, sure. If that doesn't work, I will just share from my screen and go that way. If you've sent me the most recent version. Anyway, go ahead.
I can do that. I can do that as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, actually, for time, then how about I just go ahead and share the PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll go from there if that works for. Yeah.
Okay.
Make sure I can share it correctly. Let's see, presentation 2.
While you're doing that, Jason, I have a question for Olga, maybe.
Sure.
Some of us are not engaged with the forest industry and don't have a lot of knowledge or input on that industry, that sector. Can you give us a little guidance about how we should be thinking about this and our role in this meeting? It's not our world.
It's a good question. I suppose one approach could be that, this is a way to kind of get more familiar with how accounting of carbon and other emission sources is handled for forest, because some of it is kind of some general ideas are relevant for other land categories as well. But maybe from a kind of an outsider perspective, also kind of asking questions about the approach would be helpful to make sure that we explain it in a way that makes sense to non-forest experts as well.
Okay, thanks.
Quick question: are you all able to see my screen?
It's not in presentation mode.
Not in presentation mode.
Seeing slides.
Interesting. Well, let me stop sharing. Okay. Olga, would you be willing to just quickly rejoin and see if you're able to share? I will say that when I was trying to share content, I had to go click on the application and then go to the window tab in order to be able to see the PowerPoint presentation, just making sure that that's not the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, let me try.
Okay.
Be back in just a little bit.
Sure, thank you. While Olga is gone, I will say that, the both the forest as well as the developed area and urban forest category does include information about how we account for changes from other land use categories to forest. And there's also information in this presentation on how the underlying data layer in LCD, the National Land Cover data set or data sets or database, I forget which, accounts for forest across all lands. Actually, Ellen, it looks like you have a question, so I will cede the floor to you.
Yeah, regarding forests. So I asked about junipers, and apparently some of our juniper rangelands will end up in forest and some will be in grasslands or whatever the other category is. But it's a completely artificial difference between those two landscapes because the kind of work is the same. And juniper, quote, forest is going to be way different than like conifer forest. So I just want to make sure you're keeping that in mind as you move forward with forest.
Yeah, so, you know, to me, I'm kind of, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong here, what I'm hearing is, so this kind of has more to do with how the like juniper forest will be represented in terms of its carbon content, and it sounds more like you are thinking more about the sort of like the Natural Climate Solutions actions toward managing juniper forest, which we're going to hopefully cover more within the activities and metrics analysis that we're going to be doing.
Okay, but also the jobs. The
absolutely.
jobs.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yes, it's completely different from you know, cruising timber.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to make sure that it doesn't get lost. If it's going to be, if part of the rangelands are actually going to be included in forest, we need to make sure that those kinds of jobs are included in forest.
Yes. Got it.
Thank you.
Yep. Recorded your comment, and I'll make sure that to pass that along to the contractor. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Olga. We can see your screen. So
Excellent. Excellent. All right.
You're a little quiet.
Very quiet.
Maybe.
Is this better? I will speak up.
A little better, yeah.
All right. So yeah, good morning, everybody, and thanks for giving us a chance to come back and kind of keep you informed about this project and the progress that we've made. I will kick us off today, and then I'm joined by another member of our team to give you an overview of a couple of the categories that are included in the methodology and how we're approaching accounting for carbon fluxes in that. And then Jason, please kind of tell us when we should pause for questions, or if anything comes up in the chat that should be addressed immediately, because I don't think I can see all of that while I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, we'll do. I will say we're planning on pausing for questions at each of your question prompts, and I'll let everyone know the amount of time that we're going to dedicate to that. So.
Excellent. All right. So today what we wanted to cover is really quickly give you a quick progress update and the timeline of the project, and then spend majority of the time kind of going over the methodologies that we're proposing to use. And we're going to look at forests, developed areas in the state, and then the category of harvested wood products. All these seem to make sense to combine together into one session because they have to do with forests and or timber or trees more broadly. And then we're gonna kind of discuss this and get your input on potential resources and data and information that we should be considering, and then address any questions that you may have about it. So this was shared in the previous presentation as well, but we're kind of approaching the end of phase one of this project, where we have done a lot of exploration of existing data sets within the state and trying to identify and select which ones will be applicable to the inventory process. We've developed kind of an overall technical approach to this, and I'll give you a little flavor of what we're proposing on that. And then we're drafting kind of the methodology that incorporates these data sets that are going to be applied. Once we finish that by the end of this month, we will get into doing the actual calculations and come back to this group and other stakeholders to get additional input. I'll start with kind of some broad, really, methodological questions and what we're recommending for the structure of an inventory to be based on. So the inventory start year will be 1990. And then when it comes to kind of the frequency of updates or, integration of new data sets related to land use and land cover changes, it will be a 5-year interval between data sets, and emissions will be interpolated between the years. So the inventory will actually have values estimated for every year from 1990 on, but it will be based on data that comes in about every 5 years. The reason for that is some of the data sets don't get updated annually, and so we're kind of linking some of the annual data that we have to this more sporadic data sets and making sure and aligning those, and then kind of in between we're filling in with interpolation. So what are these basic data sets that we're using to kind of identify what kind of land categories there are and how much of them there are in the state? We are proposing that the National Land Cover Dataset provided by USGS is used for this. The reason for the selection is that this is kind of the most consistent, reliable data set we have over the time series that covers wall-to-wall state land. And so we're able to identify, based on the classifications that NLCD has, what would go into forest, what would go into a grassland, what would go into undercropland, wetlands, developed land, and all other. And these are definitions developed by this data set, so they're not necessarily always based on ecological factors. They are based on satellite imagery. So there's, some interpretation that has to go into it. But because of the temporal coverage and kind of the consistency across the entire time series, this is really kind of a foundational land classification extent and change that we have to use. And then we're overlaying a number of different additional data sets to characterize the land in the state. And one of them is looking at soil taxonomy and reference carbon stock levels in Oregon. And so we're using the USDA Surrogate data for that. And we're classifying, in addition to land categories and vegetation that's occurring on these lands, is what kind of soil, whether it's mineral or organic soil, and getting the soil carbon stocks from Surrogate at 30 centimeter depth for majority of the land. And then with wetlands, we'll probably be looking at 1 meter depth soil profiles. And another kind of key data set that we'll be using to further classify and stratify different land types is by climate zones. Climate zones allow us to refine and apply emission factors that are more specific, more accurate for those regions. So here what you see on the right is the climate zone map that we'll be applying. This is based on the EPA ecoregion level 3 mapping. And one modification is that it merges the two ecoregions that are in the southeastern part of the state, Northern Basin and Range, with I think it's the Snake River ecoregion,
Yes,
which is a little bitty portion here that's kind of tucked in the center eastern part. So this is the Oregon Conservation Strategy map and ecoregion designation that was adopted. So we're applying that in the inventory to be consistent with that. And then just a really quick high-level overview of what we need in order to do these kinds of emission estimations. This is a repeat from the last meeting, but we thought we'd kind of just refresh everybody's understanding. In order to estimate emissions from any given activity or kind of land area, what we need is what is known as activity data. So what is kind of a unit of activity that could result in emissions or removals annually? So this could be acres of particular land type or salinity, or degree to which particular management practice is applied, or the amount of fertilizer that is applied. So this is like, what is the anthropogenic activity that we're characterizing? That is usually multiplied by some kind of emission factor. So that is just a parameter that indicates how much emissions associated with that unit of activity we expect to see. So we'll be talking about, carbon densities, biomass carbon densities during this meeting a lot. But there are, other emission factors related to methane emissions, for example, from wetlands, or nitrous oxide emissions from soils due to fertilizer application and things like that. And it's just emission factor is kind of this parameter that allows you to quantify per unit activity how much greenhouse gas is emitted. And that ultimately gives you the value of emissions, and you would be kind of rolling them up across different land categories to get the total kind of annual emissions for the state for the time series.
Question before you move on. That's okay?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, go for it.
This is Megan Temple with ORCAN. I remember that there are activity-based metrics, and we have some, and I'm wondering if the activity-based metrics are part of the inventory or if they're separate. I've seen activity data, which makes me think of those activity-based metrics, but am I correct in assuming that that's a whole separate effort?
That is correct. So the conservation activities, restoration, whatever, soil management practices, those will be captured. Well, some of those will be captured in the activity-based metrics analysis that we're doing, which we will be starting, before the end of this year. So those will be captured there. There's certain activity data information that's captured in the inventory, and then there's other activity data that's, we're doing a full accounting for in the state, and then figuring out how we can assign emission factors and other community impact metrics or community impacts to them. So
great. Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately they do capture kind of the same, what is done. And then what we are taking that information, and by applying emission factors to that, then the impact that we are estimating is on emissions and removals of greenhouse gases.
Okay, what are the terms again? I think what Megan is describing is consequential accounting, and this is more
allocational
accounting.
Yeah.
Betsy, it looks like a good question.
Yeah, we have time for questions about the use of the which data sets and all that at the end of this part, right?
Yes, we do. Mhm.
Okay, I can hang on then. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So I will turn it over to my colleague Anup Joshi, who will describe the forest land approach in more detail. And I can advance the slides for you, Anup, if you just tell me to go to the next slide.
Okay, that'll be faster than me trying to share it.
Mhm.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Anup Joshi. So I'm leading the forest sector emissions, forest sector inventory for this emission calculations. So for the forest sector, we'll be using land cover land use data set, which is also known as NLCD data set, to track the amount of land change from different time periods. And then we'll also use the NLC data, land cover data has only 3 broad forest categories: deciduous forests, evergreen forests, and mixed forests. But the FIA plots uses the forest type groups. So we'll be using forest type groups to forest type groups map, and then we'll to calculate our emissions. And then for the emission factors, we need the carbon parameters, which we will be using U.S. Forest Services Forest Inventory and Analysis, or FIA plots, which are within the state of Oregon. So as and for the soil organic carbons, we'll be using SORGO data set. So again, so we'll need activity data, emission factors to be able to calculate emissions. For the activity data is amount of forest land change between certain time period. So in this series of inventory, we'll be doing, starting year is our 1990 and to 2021. And for this purpose, we'll use NLCD land cover maps from 1990, 1996, 2001, 2006, 2011, 16, and 21. And again, so for the emission factors is the amount of carbon dioxide that's emitted or removed from the atmosphere. So for this, we'll be using FIA plots to get the carbon parameters to calculate our emission factors. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of an NLCD map. So it has different land use classes, and for the forest sector, it's highlighted here. It has like 3 types: deciduous forests, evergreen forests, and mixed forests. So we'll be using this land use data, land cover, land use data from NLCD for this inventory. Next slide, please. And the FIA plots capture the data. The FIA forest inventory plots, it's based on forest type groups. And since the NLC doesn't have a forest type groups, so we're going to use another set of data, forest type groups data set, and then stratify NLCD forest type by forest type groups. So then for each forest type groups, we'll have a emission parameters or emission factors, and then we'll calculate the emissions from each forest type groups and then roll it up to the forest classes. Next slide, please. So as we said, the emission factor is, again, the amount of carbon dioxide per unit of land, in our case, per acre, emitted or removed from the atmosphere due to the forest land change. And the carbon densities for the following carbon pool we'll calculate, we'll look at the carbon pools, different carbon pools, and the carbon density of in each pool will be looked through. The above ground biomass carbon, below ground biomass carbon, deadwood, litter, and soil carbon. So all this information, information is available in FIA plot data. So we'll use that plot data to generate the emission factor for each of the forest type groups. Next slide, please. Yep. So So that's what I've present. And so there's some, we can stop here for your comments and questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna set the time for 20 minutes after the hour. So we've got 6 minutes now for questions. And if we run through this time and we get to the end of the presentation, we still have time, we can return to questions about forest later. So, okay, so from the chat, we have, does forest emission factors include the fossil fuel emissions associated with the forest activity?
Not in the forest. So the fossil fuel emissions will be captured in another sector, on the energy sector. So in the forest sector, we're just looking to the land use change. So the amount of the land use change and the amount of the the carbon emissions due to the forest cut or change in forest, and sequestration through the forest land, remaining forest land, through removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Thank you.
Now let me add to that. So all of those activities associated with human activity and vehicles and things like that are captured in the DEQ's greenhouse gas inventory, which is a sector-based inventory. And this is just about the non-sector-based stuff. So the biological, natural emissions and sequestration.
Correct. Thank you. Betsy?
So do I understand that we're counting forest land conversion as an emission?
Yes. So we're looking at the land change. So what we're looking is if the forest land is converted to other land type, let's say settlements or croplands, then the amount of the area of the land that's converted, we're going to calculate the emissions from that area of the land converted to the other land use type. And also, if the land is other land use types are converted into forest land, then we'll be calculating emissions in that part of the land too.
Okay, that was one of my questions. The other one is, I wasn't quite sure how you were using FIA data. Is it fair to say that you're using it as an overlay for all forest cover on top of the USGS information?
No, the FIA data will give us the carbon parameters or carbon densities, like, so for the particular forest type, how much carbon is there in that forest type group, and what's the growth rate, or every year the trees start growing, and as they grow, they pull the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So that'll give you the accumulations rate, and so we're going to use those for each forest types, and then apply to the total area of the forest in that forest type group.
But you're using the remote sensing.
Right. For we're using NLCD to remote sensing to figure out the amount of land change. So what portion, how many hectares of the forest land changed to something else, or how many hectares of the Douglas fir changed into something else, and then based on the carbon densities in that forest type, for example, the Douglas fir will calculate how much carbon dioxide is emitted if the forest land is converted into other land types, or if the other land types is converted into forest, how much carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere or sequestered.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One more question on that point. The Department of Forestry has done studies using FIA data that also looked at harvest activities. So are you saying that other than kind of taking an average number for forest carbon stocks and flux across a forest type, you won't be looking at using the FIA data in the same, a little more detailed way that ODF has done in the past?
So we'll be using the same forest FIA data, but for our purpose, we are looking at carbon dioxide, for inventory purposes, we're looking at the CO2 emission from the lands, from the forest side. So we'll be looking at a more coarse, lower resolution or coarser level than what ODF is doing at the habitat-based calculation of the carbon stocks and emissions.
So harvest then will not be, any change in harvest isn't a change in land use, so it wouldn't be included.
It'll be portion of it will be captured in hardwood products.
But then
And
presumably it would also be captured in the land base estimate.
Yeah, if the land is changed from one forest type to another, it's captured there.
I'm thinking more, the amount of forest, Douglas fir forest, so not a change in type, but from, say, following a harvest. How does that get factored in the inventory?
It'll come over in the harvested wood products. So it'll have some data on how much wood is harvested.
Yeah,
from the sources, and again,
I get that.
Kathy, maybe a way to think about it is that what this inventory does is if anything gets converted to a different use or way of thinking about it, we're capturing the delta, the change.
Right.
So when it shifts from a full-grown forest to a harvested forest, which has no trees, then you'll see a difference in the delta for that land. But there are some that get sequestered and captured in the harvested wood products. So it's two different places that would show up.
Okay, I was just trying to confirm that because it was a little confusing the way it was being described. So it does include the harvest data from FIA.
Correct.
Both on the land side and in the harvested wood products side.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
We're actually
It
going
does.
to talk about the harvested wood product methodology as well. So the data will come directly from ODF in terms of the harvested amount. And that is how it gets accounted.
Thank you.
I'm just noting the time. Let's go ahead and move on to the next section, and we can return to those questions once if we still have them after the harvested wood product section at the end. Go ahead.
Yeah. Jason, and can we also return to the questions that we maybe posed to the group as well to get your input on some of these things that we're.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'll write them down and put them in the chat at the end so we can seek input on all those too.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so I am switching to the other category where trees and carbon sequestered by the trees gets accounted for, which is in developed areas. So in the inventory, this will show up under developed, or sometimes it's called settlement land. And there's numerous things that emit or sequester carbon in developed or and other GHG gases in developed areas. But today we're just focusing on the trees and talking about that methodology. So we've sort of done a sweep of data that's available and try to understand what kind of data within the state that's available, and talk to a number of different groups to try to kind of get a better sense of what's out there. We had talked to the Oregon Department of Forestry and then looked at some municipalities that have urban tree programs and to see what kind of data they have. Ultimately, the challenge with this type of accounting is that this type of information usually is very decentralized and lives with counties or municipalities. There's also some information from published literature that we're going to be using when it comes to quantifying sequestration rates. The ODF generated urban tree inventory that is presented and like reported in this tree plotter map is one specific state-specific data source that we had identified that I think is something that the state can build on to utilize in the future inventories, but it's a really great starting point. And then there are also federal data sets that will be useful to us. Another NLCD data product that reports on percent tree cover, and I'll explain in a second why that is important. And then similarly, FIA program has, in addition to the tree surveys that has been doing for many, many, many years, more recently started collecting data on urban trees. And so then they have the same set of parameters that they collect for forest land, but for urban trees. And that data set will help us identify carbon densities for trees that are growing in developed areas. And so as far as the specific activity data sets, we will be relying on NLCD again to get kind of the total area of developed land and, stratified by the different types of development. And we'll also be utilizing the percent tree cover data that NLCD produces. The emission factors that will help us convert that into how much carbon is actually stored or lost will come from the sequestration rates that the National GHG Inventory uses, and they come from studies and published literature. And then biomass carbon densities will come from FIA. Those will be relevant in instances where developed land is being converted to something else. And so we just need to know how much biomass was there and may have been lost during that conversion. And so then the emissions are calculated by taking kind of a product of these different factors. And I'll show you in more detail what that formula looks like in 1 second. And so the reason why the approach is a little different for tree carbon sequestration in urban developed areas relative to forest is because they're, the conditions in which these trees grow are different. They have a much more open structure and as a result grow faster, typically. But the tree density is lower than in forested, and of course varies quite a bit because you may have kind of high intensity development, low intensity development, and different conditions will kind of drive the coverage of trees in urban areas. So that needs to that's why percent tree cover parameter is really important in this particular approach to be able to allow us to kind of account for that. And so the estimates are then based on the area of the developed land in different subclasses, percent tree cover in those areas, and then the carbon sequestration rate per unit tree cover that allows us to calculate the amount of carbon sequestered. And similar to forest and all the other land categories that are being accounted for in the inventory, we split the land when we're accounting for what, the GHG emissions and removals by land that has been in that category and remains in that category, and into the land that is converted into that category, and then it's just done for accounting purposes in the inventory realm. But in the case of developed areas, we're actually kind of the same methodology applies to both developed area that is remaining developed and the trees that are growing on it. And if a newly converted area became a developed area, the same kind of sequestration rate of trees is being applied. So some of the methodological considerations is that when land is converted to other land, urban tree biomass is assumed to be lost in the conversion. That's why we need to know kind of the carbon stock of the trees that are growing in the settlement currently. And then that comes from the FIA Urban Tree Program, which has been inventorying Portland urban trees for 4 years, since 2018 to 2022. There's data on that. And so we'll be applying that in the inventory to estimate statewide kind of carbon densities for urban trees. But as I had mentioned, the ODF's tree plotter data set on urban trees that has been generated fairly recently contains some of the information like tree height, tree diameter, tree species that could potentially allow a more nuanced estimates of carbon stocks in different parts of the state, in different municipalities. So that will be definitely something to look into to improve the inventory in the future. Let's see. So again, kind of looking at the activity data a little bit more closely, this map is the same map that Anup had showed when he was describing the forest land, but now I have highlighted the NLCD land classes that are going to be relevant to this inventory, this portion of the inventory, which is all the developed land classified under NLCD. And so there's 4 different types there: open space, low intensity, medium intensity, and high intensity. And so then we can overlay that with the percent tree cover map that also comes from NLCD, and kind of estimate the average percent tree cover in those developed areas. And we'll get a different average number for the open space and for low intensity, medium, and high intensity areas. Then the emission factors are going to be used. Those will come from the parameters that are used for the national inventory estimates. They are state specific. So for each state, there is a different sequestration rate that's derived. And it is kind of there's 2 steps in developing that. You have the gross sequestration rate for the whole tree, which is adjusted for growing conditions. And so these are kind of state specific numbers. They're not further refined for different parts of the state. And then the net from that, we adjust that to get the net sequestration rate that accounts for tree mortality and removal in the cities. Again, these all come from literature and are done at kind of like for the US as a whole, but at the state level. So there's definitely room for improvement to get a more nuanced estimate for different parts of the state in the future if appropriate data is collected. And then, as I had mentioned, when the land is converted to other land categories away from settlements, those carbon stocks from the FIA urban tree inventory for above ground and below ground carbon biomass will be applied. And then ultimately the calculation is that, you have the net sequestration rate times the developed area times the percent tree cover in the developed area to get the amount of carbon that's removed by that tree. And so we would do this calculation for each development class in that we are able to account for and differentiate through NLCD data, and then sum it all up to get the total carbon sequestered by urban trees. Yeah, and so some of the kind of questions we thought, maybe this group can help us answer is if there are, based on our cursory review, we weren't able to find any urban forestry programs in the state that actually collect carbon measurements, but if you have any thoughts about that or can point us in the right direction, that would be very much appreciated. And then in terms of land conversions, from developed areas to other land use categories, that is usually not the typical direction of land conversion that is observed, but we're curious. We do see some of that in the data, and so we're curious to get more feedback from you all regarding like what are the main factors that are driving those land conversions. Is it a restoration program or projects, a set of projects, initiatives, or any other things that will help us make sure that when we quantify those transitions, we're making proper assumptions.
Great, thank you. I'm going to give this 5 minutes here to let people answer this question, and then so at 40 after the hour, I'm going to move us to the next one, and then I will say let's try to spend 10 minutes on the harvested wood products presentation, so we can allow for 5 to 10 minutes at the end of questions for it, because I know it's clearly a topic of interest for this group. Any questions, any thoughts regarding or responses to the questions that are here? Again, we've been talking extensively with ODF representatives regarding the urban tree plotter inventory that they've been developing, but still learning a lot.
I'm happy to. This is Megan from Orcan.
Yeah.
Just regarding the question, what's driving land conversion, from developed area to cropland specifically? There's some movement to develop urban gardens. But when I read that question, I think that's not happening much. The opposite is happening. Ag land is being converted to developed areas. But it's very rarely happening the other way. It's happening on very small scales in urban settings and they're usually not paved. It's pretty rare that a paved area pavement's pulled up for a garden, but it does happen, and it's happening by even some organizations. DPave, for example, is doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
That's helpful. And I should mention, I don't know if this was ever kind of laid out so clearly, but when we account for land conversions in the inventory, this land that's converted is tracked separately for 20 years until it becomes like it moves firmly into that land type that is remaining that land type. And so we see in the data some pixels kind of move back and forth, from one category to another. And so it needs to stay in that land converted category for at least 20 years for it to become kind of a new land category. So maybe there's a garden or some gardens that, appear and then they disappear again in 5. So it's kind of, it's a little bit of a part of an issue with like the data interpretation and noise in the data, but that's why I was wanting to kind of get people's thoughts on that.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, on that note there, I just wanted to highlight in Wallowa County where I live, there's been several efforts to de-channelize the Wallowa River and get it to spread out into its floodplain. So it would basically be like changing from a cropland to more of a almost like a wetland. which could seem to be pretty important from a carbon storage point of view. But I don't know if that'd be below the resolution of your analysis, but just wanted to point out that there are several stretches of the river and continually kind of getting people thinking bigger and bigger about how to expand these wetland and braided river systems to dechannelize the river.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Yeah, thank you for that info. If it doesn't show up in this inventory, that's certainly something we can talk with our contractor regarding the activity-based metrics work for that sort of consequential accounting. Yeah, thank you. Any other responses? Okay, for the sake of time.
Chat too. I don't know, Jason, if you wanted to.
Yeah, I was scanning the chat here. I see, David, you responded to the forest section earlier, and then there's some discussion on DPAVE. I'll make sure to record all of that. And then Jeff, yeah, it's more wetland directed. I'll make sure to record all these comments in the chat, though, for moving forward. Okay, for the sake of time, let's go ahead and go on to harvested wood products, if you would.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, you get to hear from me some more. So we're kind of following the same format for all the categories that we're walking you through. For harvested wood products, we've talked with mostly ODF. In the state, ODF is, in addition to the forest carbon inventory, has published in the past kind of an accounting of carbon in the harvested wood products, and then as they plan to publish kind of an updated set of numbers in, I think, in early 2026 or close to that, together with it will be kind of get folded into the forest carbon inventory. So it goes together. And so there's kind of a lot of people that are looking at that and thinking about that already at ODF, which is really great. There's some other kind of activities and resources we identified, but mostly it's going to be ODF data that we'll be using because it already encapsulates the federal harvesting that occurs on federal land in the state as well. And so looking at the bottom table on the slide, the activity data, which is basically timber harvest, and then use and disposal pathways will come from ODF and the model that ODF uses to capture that. The emission factors are things that are related that help us understand better and characterize these pathways, use and disposal pathways. So like when the timber is harvested, what part of it gets converted into what types of kind of wood products, and then how much of that gets converted into products in use, things like furniture, housing, paper, etc. And then further down the pathway, how long is it in use? How is it disposed of? And then what happens during disposal as well. So those are all the different bits of information you need in order to account for harvested wood product carbon stocks. And they come from literature, from ODF, from kind of expert judgment that ODF has collected and used to parameterize the model that they're using to do these estimates. And so it's all embedded in the model. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in just a second. And so the methodology is using this tool to quantify everything that is based on the production approach, which means that it takes only the harvested wood that was produced in the state of Oregon, which is not necessarily equal to the products that are disposed in Oregon that may have come from outside of the state and been made with wood outside of the state. But this is a methodological choice that, you know, you could look at production or consumption driven ways to account for harvested wood products. And this model that the state has used previously and has invested, you know, I say already a fair amount of resources into, uses a production model approach, which as key input data takes the amount of timber harvested in the state, and that is kind of driving the estimates. This is kind of in partnership also, this modeling work effort is in partnership with the shop called Groom Analytics that develops the tool, and then CAL FIRE, because the tool is used for Oregon and California as well. And so both states have been applying the same approach.
Olga, before you go on, could we go back to your sources slide for a second?
Yeah.
I know I have two questions. I know that ODF uses data from the University of Montana Bureau of Business and Economic Research. Have they talked about that at all?
Do you mean the harvest, the timber harvest, or the disposal?
Harvested wood products.
So my understanding was that they they look at kind of tax records and various other sources of data when they're compiling together all the amount of harvested wood in the state. So it's not just on state land or private, but it's like all of the harvesting that occurs. I don't recall specifically that source of information, but I can definitely confirm.
I think
that. Oh,
go ahead, Kathy.
I was just going to say, I think that ODF worked with the organization that Betsy just mentioned to develop the model that they're using.
I think that is right. But Olga, I would feel really good or better if you wouldn't mind just going to the University of Montana BBER website, scanning the types of reports they have on harvested wood products.
If you could put in the chat the link to that specific thing, I would really appreciate it. But yeah, I can double check.
I know ODF is working with them and using them, but if you would look at it too, that would make me feel really happy. And then the other question is, when you talk about disposal pathways, does that also include like biomass that's burned for energy?
Yeah, so there is part of the kind of model parameterization is identifying and taking out of the stream the amount of wood or wood kind of product that is burned for energy before it even enters the rest of the kind of the fate pathway. So that is excluded and not quantified. So, but it's a pretty complex set of arrows and different pathways. So I wasn't going to show it today, but I'm happy to share if you wanted to take a look and see like how all of these things get captured.
I'm just concerned because if you're not including that in harvested wood products, that does take load off the grid. So that is other energy production that's not producing carbon to be made because we're using biomass instead.
Well,
so I would want that to be accounted for.
So it is accounted for to some extent in the sector-based inventory, I think under, energy and combustion and different types of energy production that gets captured under there. We've had some discussions with DEQ about that, and I don't know that necessarily those are harmonized so that like it's a consistent amount of wood that comes out of the forest system is then captured in the combustion estimates there. But unfortunately, I don't know that we'll be able to like really check that specific component under this scope of work. But it is something that we're definitely noting and should be checked more thoroughly.
We use almost 100% of every log that comes out of the forest, but it's not all in what you would think of as traditionally harvested wood products. So that's a big loss to the harvested wood pool if you're not counting that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, but if it's burned, right, it's not, then it's no longer in the store, like it doesn't get stored, right? So some of it does definitely get taken out of the carbon pool, but I don't, like I said, I'm not sure that it's exactly the same amount that gets counted by the carbon, the sector-based inventory in their energy and combustion emissions.
Okay.
I've recorded this information, and I'll make sure to go through the recording afterward and the transcript to make sure I'm capturing this discussion here, and we'll try to follow up. But just noting it's 11:50. Can we move on through? No, it's fine. I'm happy to hear the engagement, and this is why we're here. Let's just move on through the rest of this, and then we'll try to capture the rest of the questions at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, and I only have 2 more slides, which are not super technical. Let me double check. Yeah, because what I wanted to kind of demonstrate is the complexity of the model and what it does account for and what it doesn't account for. So it looks at, right, harvests that go back as far as 100 years ago. So I think the start date is 1906. Right. And so that is when you are starting to like build this pool of carbon from harvested wood products. As I mentioned already, it only considers carbon harvested within state boundaries. And then depending on the pathway, you need to account for carbon that is being stored and added to the pool as more wood is harvested. And then the release of CO2 as materials decay, as they're discarded, and as they, and the way that waste is managed when they are discarded. And so you could see here, and I have the link to the tool on the slide. If anybody's curious to go check it out, it's all kind of information that you can look at and play with. And you can see sort of how the carbon in the timber that's harvested, gets apportioned to different pathways. So once it's harvested, it turns into something that's in use, like, furniture, tables, cabinets, paper, other things. And then some of it is so emitted with energy capture, that is the kind of used as fuel. And so when you look at, 1920 here as an example, a big chunk, right, gets burned right away. And so that no longer then is kind of accounted for in the carbon pool that's stored. And then you could see that some of it is discarded after a period of time. Dumps are where it was discarded without much management. And then solid waste management has changed over time. So I will show you what carbon that got harvested in 1920 looks like, where it ends up after 100 years. So now you see that pathway looks different. So this is the same kind of harvest amount, but now much more of it has been discarded after 100 years of being in use. And then how it's, once it's discarded, some of it goes into dumps, some of it is landfilled and composted, some of it is burned, et cetera, et cetera. And once it is in the solid waste management system, again, there's maybe some decay with energy capture and some decay without energy capture. So this is what the model captures, all these different pathways, and how it apportions carbon to them is all parameterized in the model and based on kind of literature, studies, data that has been collected in the state, etc. And in the end, you get kind of a number of, the amount of carbon that's stored in this pool over time. But kind of annual fluxes showing how it changed year to year. But what I guess
Olga, could you go back one? This is Alan. So Betsy, I think what you're talking about is the emitted with energy capture. So that's biomass used for energy. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
So it gets captured there. Yeah. And then the energy captured would be in this sector-based inventory done by DEQ.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, Alan.
All right, so should we move over to the questions slide again? I would say let's prioritize answers to some of these questions here, since we're in the very last stages of this inventory preparation work. Some of the work's already started, so if we have additional sources of information here, that would be extremely useful for our contractors.
Olga, I'll try and get specific studies from BBER, but I did put the link for the organization into the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, so I think, as I said, the model with probably 100 different parameters, like conversion ratios from these different, raw material to product, its life cycle, disposal, and where it gets disposed and what that disposal looks like. So this can all be, I think, improved and refined, but I think it's, these are kind of data that may live with another agency, DEQ, or occur in some literature studies, and so kind of bringing it all in and understanding where to plug it in. That's the hardest part of kind of improving this model, but I think definitely can be done and should be revisited. And ODF intends to continue to do that. So I think that's this type of accounting will continue to be part of the state's effort. Anyways, we're just leveraging the effort that's already kind of happening in the state.
Thank you. All right.
It's always helpful to remember that there are 3 concurrent inventories going on at the same time, all capturing different things. So the sector-based is the traditional emissions from production and use of energy in transportation, industry, all these things. Then there's the consumption-based inventory, which captures some of that, but substitutions and upstream emission changes that are not in Oregon or in the consumption-based inventory. So it's larger than the sector-based inventory. And then kind of over here, a third set is the natural climate solutions inventory, which has the natural working land stuff in it, which is sequestration. There is a bit of mitigation that occurs there, but most of that is about the sequestration aspects of the inventory. So having those 3, sometimes when things change, they shift from one inventory to the other. So like when biomass gets harvested and gets used in a biomass electricity plant, it's now calculated in the sector-based inventory, and the change in the land use conversion is in the natural-based inventory, nature-based inventory. Hope that's helpful.
No, I think it's helpful, and this is our first round of the land-based net carbon inventory, and we're there's plenty of room in our report to note areas of improvement where we could improve harmonization or in writing this report, making sure that we are clarifying when one source of emissions or removals shifts from one inventory to the concern of another. All right, well, considering the time, Olga, will you stop sharing? And then Jen, will you share the final slide of the agenda just so we can remind everyone what's going on tomorrow? And just to be clear, I'm monitoring the chat, Dean. These are great comments and considerations. And we'll probably follow up with like an email trying to respond to some of these questions that are still in there. If you have additional comments or questions, please throw it in the Google Doc that I linked above. Always happy to look there for your input. For the next meeting, October 24th, we are going to be covering the cropland category and all the different aspects of that. And so I'm sure there will be important clarification for people who still may have doubts after all this information regarding what is going to be in the sector-based versus the land-based net carbon inventory. We are working very hard with coordinating with ODA and DQ to make sure we're not doing the double counting. And then we're going to get some preliminary results from Estelano Advisors and their project team regarding their initial workforce assessment and their initial needs assessment. And then much farther ahead in November, we should start getting some preliminary or draft results from this inventory work and some additional results from this workforce group. So things are picking up. Kathy, do you have any closing comments?
I just want to thank everybody for the time and attention today.
Yeah.
And the consultants, the presentations.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, I guess we will close it out. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.